Hi Aruna. Thanks for being able to make it. I assume that.
No problem. It didn't work on my laptop. So I'm on my phone, not ideal, but let's go. Hello, everyone.
Hello,
Hello.
Aruna. Welcome.
Okay. Well,
Thanks, man, and sorry for the delay, but it just didn't work on any of two of my laptops. So.
Well,
it's
it's always a struggle to join these conference platforms for the first time.
okay. Well, I'd like to thank everyone for joining us for this fireside chat call. Thank you for your interest. Before we begin, I'd like to quickly introduce ourselves, and of course, we'd like to introduce Aruna. Aruna, thank you for joining us. Thank you for making the effort. Sorry about the browser. Um, Aruna is actually the managing director of SABIC Ventures. She has over 28 years of international work experience spanning a range of management functions. And she's here to share with us today how to build a successful career in the CVC industry. As for myself, my name is Xavier Wong. I'm the marketing director of CM Venture Capital. We are a venture capital that is based in Shanghai, and we are focused on future industries that will make a difference to our world. Well, basically, we invest in new industries that will shape mankind's tomorrow, and we predict future trends, select potential movers and shakers, support them, and build great companies to partner. And we partner with corporate investors such as SABIC, for example, and our ecosystem. So once again, thank you all for joining us. Now, before we begin this really interesting casual sharing, I'd like to request that all of you turn off your microphones on your mobile phones or your laptop while we have Aruna share with us her thoughts on how to build a successful CVC career in this highly competitive and exciting industry. Thank you once again, Aruna. I think previously I've sent you some questions, but don't worry, those are just for previews. Maybe at the start, we'd like to know if you can briefly introduce yourself, say big and your organization.
Sure. Thanks, Xavier, and thanks, Min, for the opportunity. I think I met some of you in Shanghai when I was there earlier this year at the CM event in Anhui. So really excited that we can continue this dialogue, especially as an emerging CVC of community in China. So as Xavier said, my name is Aruna. I was born in India because I clearly don't look very Dutch, and where shall I start? I have an engineering degree by background, but I certainly wouldn't live in any house that I have built with my engineering skills anymore. So I've been in a range of functions. I started my career in the oil field, primarily working as an offshore engineer on the rigs, looking at oil and gas exploration. Since then, in the same company, it's a company called Schlumberger, and actually the company has a huge presence in China as well. And so I moved around in a range of functions, from the field to product development to product testing to HR, actually training and recruiting and staff development, to finally line management in Australasia. Before, I think I just got a little bit tired of the oil industry, so I went and did an MBA in Switzerland. And since then, I've been in VC. So clearly, I think if I recall the community I met in China, I'm certainly way older than you are, as you can tell from the length of my career as well. So I've been in VC for the last 18 years, primarily based out of the Netherlands, but most of the time with a global focus. So I started with Shell Technology Ventures, which started off as a corporate VC, and then we spun out into an independent fund, similar to what CM Ventures is doing with Shell as the LP, but we were the GP along with London and Middle East based investors. So at the time, it was the largest energy based VC fund. We had about $1.4 billion of funds to invest in energy clearly being a very broad definition. So looking at conventional exploration and production technologies as well as renewable, and probably way ahead of its time, looking at what to do with, say, recycling PET, recycling carbon, which came out of the oil and gas production processes. So unfortunately, not a lot of those companies were successful because I think we were just about 15 years ahead of the pressures that we have in the industry today. Then for a brief while, I had my own consultancy helping Middle Eastern investors looking at technologies in North America and Europe, while I also worked with a provincial fund here in the south of the Netherlands. And since 2015, I've been with SABIC. And SABIC is a Middle Eastern oil company headquartered out of Saudi Arabia. And clearly, with a lot of the collaboration between Saudi Arabia and China, it's an exciting time to have this discussion because I think the collaboration is promising and there is a lot we can do as two countries together. I'm still based in the Netherlands, but I have teams based out of China. I think one of my team members, Zoe, I think is on this call. And of course, in Europe and in the Americas, which is kind of the more established VC markets. So what do we focus on? So clearly we are a CVC, right? So like a lot of you, we focus on the strategic areas that are of interest to SABIC. So in our case, given where we are as an industry, it's very simple. We are focusing on circular economy for SABIC and its customers, and we are focusing on energy transition or carbon neutrality for SABIC and its customers. SABIC itself has two major businesses that we support. One is the commodity petchem business, or the polymers and the chemicals business, and the associated, of course, digitalization and manufacturing technologies. And we also have an agri-nutrients business. And of course, as you can imagine, the Middle East, the Indian subcontinent, and the greater China region and South America are the biggest agricultural markets and growing agricultural markets at the moment. So for us, it's also very exciting to see what we can do to help our agri-nutrients business get into low carbon or no carbon products and technologies. So very simple to remember: circularity and carbon neutrality for SABIC, its businesses and its customers.
Wow, Aruna, that's a very storied history you've had. That's quite a journey you've taken, and much respect, much respect. So we're quite curious to build a successful career in the CVC industry. How do you build a CVC organization? What are the core skills that you look for when you're building a team? And, how do people prepare for the kind of role?
Look, I think CVCs are a unique beast, right? And sometimes we, of course, support financial VCs, and sometimes I think we annoy you, right? So we are clearly in between, where we are not the corporate R&D organizations who have a very long term. And of course, the financial VCs, where clearly there is more personal carried interest and financial returns at stake. So we're somewhere in the middle. So we're looking at a clear understanding of what the core organization does. So I think certainly some technical expertise or a broad understanding of the industry. I'm not a chemical engineer or a material scientist, but still it is, of course, clearly good to understand what the core business wants. But you also need to have a commercial mindset and understand how financial returns work. And so we are somewhere in the middle. We probably have more patience than financial VCs, because clearly, this is not making or breaking my pension, but we clearly want to add strategic value to the company, right? So when I do my presentations to the CFO, he's not as interested in how much money you have spent, but more what is the strategic value to SABIC? What have we done in terms of NPV that we've added to the business, either as an addition to the existing business or as a new or a future business unit, right? So I always like to explain to the new members in my team, we do strategic investments with financial discipline. So what do you need to come into the team, and what do I look for? I certainly look for basic understanding of our industry, but clearly I don't need somebody who's a double PhD in a specific polymer, right? Because I actually don't want people who are seriously deep in one space. I need people who have a broad understanding, techno-commercial understanding of what fits, what doesn't fit, and then look at it and, hey, how is this actually translate into an operating business model for the company, and how can SABIC and this company work together? I'm sure just like CM Ventures, we look at anywhere between, I guess we're trying to get more focused, but we still look at a few hundred technologies a year, right? So as soon as you see them, if you're not able to quickly filter out, I would say 95% of those opportunities very quickly, then you're never going to do any deals. So I guess if I were to summarize this rambling answer is basic technical skills, definitely a commercial mindset, the ability and the courage to quickly make decisions, because you never have all the information that you need, but you need to make a quick go or no go decision on whether you're going to invest more resources or not. You need good communication skills, and I think we talk about that a bit later as well, because you need to communicate with the internal stakeholders on whether this fits with what they're looking for or not. But you also need to be and the door between the corporate and the startup, and that's a balancing act that you always need to have. And then I would say incredible patience and thick skin, because you are basically stuck in the middle between a very large organization and a small impatient startup, and you just need to juggle. So certainly multitasking is a huge skill to have.
Okay, that's really interesting. I guess it's about is it about a jack of all trades but a master of none, you're saying?
Pretty much, right? So, or in this case, maybe a Jane of all trades in our audience today.
A Jane of all trades, that's right. Okay,
Right.
really interesting. Okay, so from our understanding, CVCs have many internal and external stakeholders. So communication skills must be very important. How do you navigate the hierarchy?
Oh, good question. So that's pretty much, I guess, how I spend most of my days, I think. So I guess, we talked about this a little bit in Shanghai as well, is it's very important to make sure that you understand what your internal stakeholders have, because contrary to a common belief that, corporates have so many people and they have so many resources, all of these resources have a day job. And their day jobs are ticking along just fine without startups and without the interference of ventures, right? So when we go to them, it's very clear that first of all, you do spend some time to understand what they want. And that is why I said it's very critical for the people in my team to be able to take that understanding and filter out most of the things you don't want to bother your internal stakeholders with, right? And then you take the ones only that are relevant with a clear case on how this could be helpful to them. So it is always looking at it more from a client perspective on both sides. For your internal stakeholders, you're bringing a startup to them to say, what is in it for you if you invest in it? And then you're going to the startup and saying, what is in it for you if you work with SABIC? So for sure, there needs to be a value proposition for both sides. If not, the relationship is not going to work. So how do I navigate the hierarchy? And I will bring it, I guess, closer to home, because after navigating Shell, I would say partially successfully, mainly because the company is so big and the dynamics are different. You need to consider where your parent company is playing in the value chain. So if I look at energy/chemicals, the integrated oil companies are more enablers. They are very much focused on their few core skills, which could be, seismic acquisition. So they find a piece of or an oil or gas field before anybody else does. LNG, LPG, gas to liquids. So very few things that are core to oil companies, right? Oil and gas companies or petrochemical companies. Otherwise, most of the time, the way they work is in joint ventures, where technologies are quite often accessible to both, or they're licensing technologies across each other. So in the top end, I would say the hierarchy navigation you don't really need. All you need to do is to have a broad mandate of where you are supposed to enable the industry, and on you go. And that's much simpler. If you come further down to where SABIC is playing, And then we'll get to the brand owners and the players in between, SABIC and the consumer. So SABIC needs to deliver materials to different industries, right? So we don't have the benefit or the advantage of the oil and gas companies, where there are a few oil and gas companies who pretty much, it's a B2B market, they pretty much hold the market captive, I would say, because there are quotas and OECD allowances and production limits and so on. We are in a situation where we need to have a certain advantage, and I'm sure the people we have on the call from BASF, Solvay, Dow, they would feel similar, that at some point you are in a commodity business, so you need to differentiate yourself. So for us, it's more important that we see some sort of value in the strategic collaboration with the startups. So that's where the navigating, as you alluded to, becomes more important, because you need to understand what they want. You need to understand what the startup can offer and what the startup's longer term ambitions are. And then you're trying to mix it. So to my team, I always advise saying, don't go to the chiefs to get approval first. Start with the people who eventually, if you do close the deal, who are the people who are actually going to be working with the startup? Start with them, figure out what their concerns are, what their roadblocks are, and if you've addressed them, for the next level of engagement, for example, for the non-binding term sheet, go to the next level and then basically work your way up, because the people who make the decisions are here and the people who are doing the work are here. So you need to work and you need to use the different skills. So it's my role as the managing director to make sure the top layer stakeholders are engaged and they're involved and they know what's going on. And it is the technology scouts, like in my team, like Zoe, where she needs to look at how are the working level technology leaders or the experts in a certain phase are going to work. And then you need to bridge that gap. And if I look at some of the names in the audience, then if you go further down, it starts to become more and more critical, because by the time you get to the brand owners, the Unilevers, the Danones, the Nestles of this world, and of course, most of them have their own venturing units, P&G, they have their own venturing units, where then the differentiation becomes extremely important. And even BAT, as one of your investors, there the differentiation to the customer is very critical. So then the value proposition and a very clear value proposition becomes important. So there your stakeholder engagement actually with the startup is critical, not just from product enhancement, but also communications, market penetration, pricing, because once you've gone down a certain path, it's very difficult to start increasing pricing on your consumer, right? So I think for each one of them, there is a different approach depending on where you play in the value chain. But again, for the communication and navigating the hierarchy, the whole, the chain of all trades becomes really important.
Indeed. That's quite a unique skill that not many may have. Okay, that's really inspiring. So next question. As CVCs are about investments, do you have a routine or a system that you rely on to make sure that you make the right decisions? And what have your best decisions been so far? And how do you deal with investments that don't do so well?
Oh, do I have a routine or a system? I would say rather than a routine or a system, we have a clear governance and engagement plan. And it more or less focuses in the same way that I alluded to, that we basically made a matrix of who are all the stakeholders that need to be involved in a particular transaction, to make sure that further down the line, because it's easy to close a deal, right? But it's, what are you going to do afterwards? And as you and Min very well know, closing the deal is just the beginning of the relationship. And then after that is how do you deliver value and how do you take the company to exit? So we have an engagement matrix where it has all the stakeholders who need to be consulted. Some of the consultation, depending on the transaction, could be, look, it's not relevant, we don't mind. So that's fine. But in our case, for example, we have the technology folks in the business, we have the commercial folks in the business. We need to consider tax, export control, branding, safety, sustainability, right? Treasury, do we have cash in the right entity? And certainly you in CM have been through that journey with us on, hey, how do we manage the entities? So it's always easy to inform them upfront, because particularly corporate functions, they don't like surprises. And especially when, as I said earlier, it's an addition to your day job, they don't want more hassle. So it's better to let them know upfront. And we basically start eliminating all the concern groups to say, okay, now this is done, tax has no issues, export control has no issues, and we kind of go up in the hierarchy and we start dropping off the functions that are not relevant. And that way, at least when I get to the end decision, I know I've had technology, business, finance, and ventures look at it, right? So at least you've had different perspectives in it to minimize the chances that you've missed a certain risk that is important to the corporate. Then do I know that it's 100% right decision? Absolutely not, because I guess ventures is a risk reward discussion. And I've had some very interesting conversations with our corporate finance group saying, look, if you really want zero risk, then you should just shut down ventures, because we are 100% risk. It is how it is. And so once they get over that understanding that it is 100% risk, and the whole story is that if we have 50% or 30% or 20% of them successful, that makes the whole venturing effort worthwhile, right? So the best decisions I've actually made, I would say, and I will stick to SABIC Ventures as an example, is actually not investing in a couple of companies where we completely finished all the due diligence. I was ready to go to my investment committee, and then we realized there were some governance concerns in the company, particularly with the behavior, in this case, of the chairman of the board. And it was heartbreaking, because because at that time I was doing investments rather than being the managing director, a year, basically doing this, closing this and getting all the alignments, because it was the process technology. And we eventually had to recommend saying no. And why do I call it one of the better decisions I made is because we've had that twice when we've said, because of governance issues, we are not going to do it. Because, technology you can fix. Even I would say some people in the startup you can change. It takes time. It costs time, money, and a lot of, tears and sweat, but you can do it. But when there is a fundamental gap in how you behave in a company, that is extremely difficult to change. And it's extremely difficult to detect. And that's probably a big difference as a CVC, is that when there is a compliance or a safety breach or a sustainability negative impact, it's not the startup's name that's going on the front headlines, it's the corporate. So I would say, just before you go to your investment committee, after you've done all your due diligence, just do what I call the newspaper test. Are you happy to see the name of this company associated with your brand in the headlines of a newspaper? With the information at the time, of course. And you need to protect that. Investments that don't do well, I think we all have our share as investors, right? That don't do well. So there again, there is no shortcut. So you obviously need to work with the startup first to see if it is a problem that can be addressed, if it is a restructuring of the company, or is it a cost structure issue that we need to fix? Is it a market traction issue, or it's simply lack of management skills, interest, or capability? And I'm listing that in those order because that is the order and how easy it is to fix. Because even though it sounds like the technology is the core component of your investment, technology is quite often, given time, effort, it's almost a binary decision. It's either going to work or it's not going to work, or there are certain steps you need to take to make it work. And then, of course, the decision is much easier on, hey, the time that it's going to take to fix it, does it still justify my business case and the strategic value I get, right? Market introduction, it's kind of the next step. So technology is working. Is there just no pain point in the market? But hopefully that's something you've done already in your due diligence. So now it becomes, are you talking to the right customers? And even that can be addressed by focusing the company through the board or getting the right board members to make sure you're opening the right doors, getting the right investors with the right strategic LP composition. So there's a lot of things you can do to make sure that even market penetration is done. But where we typically have an issue is when this and the lack of the right management skills come together. And then it's really difficult to fix. And yep, of course, I would be lying if I said we don't have cases like that in the portfolio right now that keep me awake. But in the end, if you've tried step 1 of technology, step 2 of market, step 3 of communication with the management team and the board to try and restructure the company or refocus the company, but if the company fundamentally is not aligned with you anymore in the direction that they're going, I think it's time to call it a day. And there, again, the communication becomes very important because you still need to communicate to your internal stakeholders why you're taking that decision. It shouldn't be from one day to the other a surprise. Clearly, there is a segregation of the information that you as a shareholder have, and of course the fiduciary duties. So quite often the members of my team who sit on boards, they have access to information that I as a shareholder don't. So you need to base it on the right information, and you need to make sure that you're not just communicating with the startup on why you're moving towards a certain decision, but you also need to bring your internal stakeholders on, because don't forget, they have committed time, effort, and resources to help you get to the investment decision. So they also need to be part of it when you decide to change your course of action. But yeah, there's no easy way. Huh? It's just a lot of stress when investments don't do well.
Yeah, a lot of stress, a lot of relationships to manage and expectations to manage as well. Yeah, it's not easy when dealing
and
with
a lot of emotions on all sides, not just in the ventures team, the startup, the internal group. So the ventures team never comes out as the good guy.
like gangsters, huh? Yeah. Anyway, so great. That's really really interesting. Once again, I mean, it's a very very complex minefield. I feel that you're treading on, right? I mean, it's a question of, oh, how am I gonna avoid this, like the next mine, right? And if I do step on it, how am I gonna recover from it? Okay, so the next question. Keeping in touch with the startups and stakeholders is important. So cultivating and building relationships in this role is key. Is there a certain type of personality that fits this career, or is it something that can be developed?
That's a very interesting question. I would say the key thing is authenticity, right? I don't think there's a particular personality type. I think like any diverse team, you need a combination of, people skills, extrovert type people to, I would say, more analytical, methodical mindset. And you need all those skill sets within the ventures team to complement each other, because like I tend to be very much optimistically bigger picture people. I think we can talk to people and make things work, but I also rely on the members I have in my team who are much more methodical, numeric, data based, because also as I'm sure Min and you can relate to this, that after a certain number of years of experience, you quite often, I don't know, have a gut feel for a decision rather than working through it. And you could say, okay, that's how I feel it, but it's always, always, always very good to have people in your team who can work through that decision as well. So I think you need all types of personalities in the team, just like any well-functioning team, you need diversity. But the one thing that I would say is absolutely important is authenticity. So even if it's the most it's the toughest decision you want to communicate, as long as people can see that you've made a genuine effort, there's a genuine reason as to why you're doing this, and you're open and transparent, I think it works. So is it something that you have or something can be developed? That I don't know. I think it's the nature versus nurture story, and I think we could be here for a rather long time if we debate that. But for me, that's very critical, because technical knowledge, whether I don't know, you're tall, short, your communication style is different. Given that startups tend to be quite out of the box to start with, I don't think you particularly need one case. Of course, there is a basic human interaction aspect that if your CEO is this uber extrovert person, then maybe nice to have somebody he or she can bounce with, but then balance it with complementary skills, just the same as you would probably have in the startup team anyway. Because if you have an uber macro person as the CEO, you need a more analytical CFO or CTO to make sure you actually stay on planet Earth. So I think it's the same thing in the team, but be authentic, because that goes a very, very, very long way. Nobody likes people who they think have an ulterior motive at heart.
Right. So no personal agendas, have a balance of between IQ and EQ, I suppose.
Yeah, and we're all here with one common goal to get the most strategic value out of and for the startup, right? So as long as you're aligned in that, okay, maybe I think as long as people understand what your end goal is, when you make a certain decision, it's not a surprise anymore.
Okay, interesting. All right, so next question then. How important is industry-specific knowledge in your role, and how do you recommend someone build that knowledge if they're transitioning from another industry?
That's quite interesting, because as I said earlier in the call, I am not from the petchem industry. So I'm oil and gas, and even in oil and gas, I'm an engineer. So clearly, every time I speak to Zoe, I learn something new. I think the key is you need to have a fundamentally curious mind, and I would say a reasonably technical mind. I don't think you need to be too deep, but like with the EQ skill set, I think even for the IQ skill set, you need a combination in a team. So if you have everybody who's uber deep into the technology, then I think sometimes you forget the macro picture. But if you always stay on the macro picture, you're clearly not identifying the risks at a micro level. So if you don't have industry specific knowledge, make sure there are people in your team who do. So I guess if I look at my Asia Pacific team, I very much rely on Zoe and Howard to tell me what makes sense and what doesn't make sense. Clearly, you are engaging with your internal stakeholders. So listen a lot to what they are saying, their pain points are, right? So I think that already helps you start looking at startups to say, okay, that's not addressing the issue that my internal client wanted, so maybe this is not important. So you certainly need a minimum level of technical and commercial skills. I think we talked about that earlier as well. It is important to have a balance of industry specific, investment specific skills in the team, so you can combine. So I've quite often seen, not quite often, I've sometimes seen CVCs where they tend to work with very financially or commercially focused teams. And at some point, the parent organization is going to ask, what is the strategic value of this, right? What is the point of this? And we all know that when there is a cost-cutting cycle, or when there is a downturn in the industry, and we have that on a regular cyclical basis, and the cycles seem to be getting a bit shorter with the pace of society and technology, I'm guessing, and the global nature. So anything that happens in one part of the world has a huge impact everywhere else. That's going to be the first thing that's going to be asked. And if you're not strategically aligned, the corporate doesn't need you anymore. On the other hand, if you are too technical, then you are not managing, all the issues of whether the startup goes well, the commercial rollout, and you're still not getting the strategic value. So either way, there is a downside to it. So at least I think where I am at the moment with SABIC Ventures, I'm fairly comfortable that the stakeholders can reach out to my team if they have a technical question, and they can reach out to my team if they have a commercial or a strategic question. And I think that's important.
Okay.
But with the number of changes we have at the moment, like the pressures we have as an industry, or any industry, doesn't have to be just chemicals. It's impossible for one person to know everything, and to know everything in terms of fundamental chemistry in our case, and also all the emerging things that are coming out. We can deal with fundamental polymer chemistry, but then you have carbon neutrality, which is all about heat efficiency and thermodynamics, and you have digital, which is a whole different ball game. Especially at my age, I don't understand how a company is worth billions when they have 20 laptops and people sitting behind them. So there's a lot of stuff happening, and one person having industry specific knowledge is not enough, right? So it becomes less important, but it becomes more critical to be able to assimilate a lot of information fast.
Okay. Well, that's good advice. That's great advice. Okay, so the next question might be related to the previous one. How do you keep up with emerging trends and technologies that are relevant to a role such as yours? Do you have any advice for someone just starting out in this career? Like, where would they get exposure, or what can they learn from?
How do you keep up with difficulty? Because there's a lot changing, and I make the best resolutions, I would say, on a monthly basis, to say I need to dedicate at least 1 or 2 hours a week to read up on what's happening, keep on top of things. It's not easy with the amount of information we have. I am sure, like in this 1 hour that I'm not looking at my inbox, there'll probably be about 60 to 70 emails coming through, right? So there is just a lot. And the other thing, of course, is information is so easily available. I find it difficult to go through which information should I read or not. You have McKinsey sending you articles every day. You have Harvard Business Review sending you articles every day. You have, Financial Times. You have the Wall Street Journal. And depending on which region you are, you have the regional news as well. And of course, industry news, you have databases. So at some point, say if I have taken a week off or something, I actually select all of these and say delete, because by the time I read them, it's probably outdated, right? So the way I try to do it is be very selective in picking my data sources. So I would say I've just narrowed down to 1 or 2, and particularly databases where we subscribe to, I try to customize the news alerts that I get to say that, okay, I just want to look at new things coming out or companies in this space. And of course, like right now, it's on my to-do list to go through a couple of those again now, because you realize that even your search criteria or your filter that you've set up are out of date in 6 months. So it's something that you need to, there's only way to do it is to just don't get obsessive about it, because even with emerging trends and technologies, they're not changing on a daily basis. But at least make sure that whatever frequency works for your work-life balance, try to read the newspaper, stay alert. I think the good thing is we have information at our fingertips constantly. So it's not like the olden days when if you went on a plane, you couldn't read anything. So I download a few things. I go through things when I'm standing in a line to check in or waiting for my baggage, or so just read through it. And I think try to make it fun, lighter reading than say, oh, I need to write a thesis on this as soon as I'm done reading it, because the more difficult you make it for yourself, I think the more you're likely to procrastinate on it or avoid doing it. But have I got a magic system that works perfectly? Absolutely not. And that's where that the diversity in the team comes in as well. And ideally, maybe one of the things we need to do as a team is to say, hey, let's all pick one sector perhaps, or one space, and keep the rest of the team abreast on what's happening there. So I don't know if maybe that's something we need to do, but it's no perfect answer. Just find something that works for you. Just be conscious that you're never going to be 100% on top of everything all the time. Right? So as long as you don't punish yourself for it, I think you just keep it fun. Because if you make it fun, then yeah, life is good.
Yeah. Well, you gotta make it fun if it's a marathon, right? And this is quite a marathon. Yeah.
Yeah, marathon, I think it's still it's not something I think I can make it a fun, but I take your point.
You gotta enjoy it. You're gonna run it. Okay. Well, let's come to one final question, and it's a really important one. If you were to give one piece of advice to someone aspiring to be a director at a CVC firm, what would it be and why?
I would say find something that you're passionate about. And that's the space you need to work in, because it's a lot of work, right? But if you love what you do, then it's not work anymore. And we all spend a lot of time at work. So I realize it's a luxury position to be in, but if you find something that you're passionate about, the authenticity is easy, the interest that you have is easy, and it's just fun. So find your passion. Take the time to find your passion, because maybe the first thing you find is not it, but take your time to find the passion.
That's good advice. Finding your passion. It's always about finding your passion, because your passion is where your purpose is. And it's always good to have a purpose. Great. Yeah. Well, thanks, Aruna. That's been fantastic sharing. I think it's been very, very useful and really, really insightful, you know. And we know you're a very, very busy person and really appreciate your time. We're gonna leave these last 10 minutes for a Q&A with the audience. So right now, I'd like to invite the audience to see if you have any questions for Aruna here. Well, you have the opportunity to ask her questions on how to have a successful career in the CVC industry. The floor is open.
How do I see everybody's faces?
I think you can click a speaker view. You can choose views, I think, or probably on the browser, probably.
I'll figure it out. I'll figure it out. Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh, I see my friend from Nanjing here.
Yep. So if anyone has any questions, please feel free to ask. You can unmute yourselves and feel free to ask questions.
Hi, Aruna. This is Vanessa. Sorry, my camera is blocked because I'm in the office due to the security reason. We cannot open the camera in the office.
Yeah.
But we met in last time when you were in
in
China. Yes. Nice seeing you again. Since this topic is about I think this topic is about female career development related. Let me check again.
Well, it's open to
open Q&A. Feel free to ask.
Yeah.
Well, since you're a female, I'm a female as well. I'm just curious to see your how you feel about this, because usually people say that man is more a talker, while female is more a listener. To my experiences, I feel that is kind of true, because women, for my experience, I'd like to get information more as a listener, to get all kinds of information from the people I talk to, and then I ask questions and just to listen what they talk. So how do you feel about that in terms of doing investments? If female is more a listener, then we don't have our voice to speak up, then people will not know us, right? If we always as a listener. So do you feel that first, do you feel that differences, or if you feel that differences, how do you think that it's very important for us to talk more, to speak out?
Okay.
Yeah, you know what I mean.
Yeah, I know what you mean. So Vanessa, that's a really interesting question, right? So I would split the answer into a few bite-sized chunks. So first is, I always say to people, look at it as what you would call feminine behaviors and masculine behaviors rather than men and women, right? Because especially if you ask my husband, I don't think he will say I'm a good listener. I'm more a talker than a listener. So I think yes, but I agree with you that it's probably more a feminine behavior to listen, to try to understand, to empathize, to collaborate, right? And what you would call in most psychological papers, it's masculine behavior to act, to execute, to lead, right? But I do believe that every person has a combination of feminine and masculine behaviors, right? So, and I think that's where it particularly in investments, and we talked about being a very unique personality to try and switch whenever it's needed. It's good to listen in the beginning to understand what is needed, but at some time, of course, you have to say something, right? But when you say something, particularly when you're negotiating, it's not about the volume of what you're saying. Right? It's not the quantity of words that you've used, but quite often you'll find it's the quality of what your input is. And more these days, when we're working virtually, when we are practically in meeting overload, is people get fed up with and I'm sure you've been in corporate calls like that, when people say something for the sake of saying something and they actually don't have a point. And actually, I'm not sure that reflects very well on people, because I know there are certain members in my team who, for example, don't chat in every call. But when they say something, I go, yeah, that's a valid point. So I think about your personal integrity and credibility. When you say something useful, right? So you don't have to force yourself to be somebody different, because there's obviously extroverts and introverts, and that will always be the case. But make sure that if you have a point, that you say something, right? I coach a couple of people and they ask me, how do I speak up in meetings and how can I say something when there are all these people chattering around me, right? All I say to people is, look, I understand that if your personality is quieter, then it's difficult to break in when there are all these big people, loud people talking. So then you have to ask yourself, how important is this point to me? If I stay quiet now and I don't say anything and the opportunity is gone, am I okay with it? And if you're okay with it, okay, apparently it was not an important point. But if you say, look, this is an important point, and if you go ahead without considering this point, it's detrimental and I feel strongly about it, then you need to speak up. If not, hold your peace, right? One other aspect I would bring in, though it wasn't quite in your question, is also being young and female, right? So I think throughout my entire career, it's only sadly in the last couple of years when I'm not the little girl in the corner, right? So I think that I started, as I said, in an oil field where, usually I was the only girl. We were 3 women in the whole global engineering workforce. So I've always been the little girl. And in the beginning, it used to bother me. Yeah, I mean, I guess maybe I miss the days when I used to be the little girl in the corner. I'm not anymore. So, but even now, I mean, jokes aside, I'm joking about it. But even in my own leadership team, I report to the CTO. And even in the CTO's team, I'm the only female, right? So, and I'm the only person who doesn't have a double PhD on something in the chemical industry. So you always have to say, yeah, where do I come in? So in the beginning, when I was younger, it used to bother me that people always assume the number of times somebody has told me, let me tell you how we drill an oil well. And I used to go, oh my God. So now what I do is I use it more as a negotiating tactic. If you want to be condescending to me, then people who are normally patronizing, they are complacent in their negotiations because they think you don't know. So if you have the competence to do so, let them do so. I think like any negotiating course that you probably have been on, if you underestimate the person that you are negotiating with, that is your problem, right? So that is actually not a good thing. So fine, let them think you don't know anything. But when you do have something to say it. And then they know that you know your business. And sometimes them assuming that you don't have the age or the seniority or the experience to go through the details is actually to their disadvantage. So use that. The other thing I would say is quite often, and there was one other point which I've forgotten, but the last thing I would say is quite often women tend to think that being a female in a business context is a disadvantage, but not always. I think socially and professionally, and I absolutely realize Greater China is very different to say a European or an American context where actually gender diversity is not great compared to what you have in Greater China. But the thing is, socially and professionally, we have a certain advantage. We can say things with a smile that men cannot. Right? So if I look at some of the boards that I've been in, I think I've been able to say tougher things to the management because I can just say it with a smile, saying, come on, guys, really, this doesn't make sense, does it? Whereas if men say it to other men, it becomes a bit of a chest thumping exercise. Sorry, Xavier, I don't mean to generalize, but it does become a bit of a Tarzan exercise, whereas you can come in, be nice, be sweet, and still say, clearly this doesn't, or explain to me how this makes sense because maybe I'm not understanding this, right? So you can also use the social nicety to drive tougher decisions. So it's not always a disadvantage. Like everything, there is a pro and a con. You know, if you are the big tall guy, people assume you have all the answers, and when you don't have the answers, you're a failure. You know, when you come in not looking threatening, you can actually get a lot more done. So I think, Vanessa, we can even take it separately, but I think just use your situation to see how can you use it to your advantage, right? You can ask certain questions where you probably find on a board that several men are thinking, but they think it's not very macho for them to ask.
Cool. Well,
right? So it's using the feminine behaviors where you can be effective. And sorry, that I just remembered the last thing I was going to say. In today's environment where there are so many challenges in the industry, feminine behaviors are, I would say, critical if we are going to achieve our goals, because it's about collaboration, it's about listening to each other, it's about partnership, and those are feminine behaviors. Again, I'm not going to say male or female, but they are feminine behaviors. If you look at a lot of the companies, people heading the sustainability groups, people actually leading some of the more successful venture funds are women. Because today it's not about let me come out and defend my little territory. It's about collaboration, and that's the only way we are going to address the challenges that we face as a race, as a planet, as an industry. Does that help?
Yeah, thank you. Well, I found that there's a lot of common in our thinking and in our experiences. So I really appreciate to hear to get more evidence or well, thank you for your for sharing. I hope we can talk more when next time we in person. Anyway,
and I joined late. I certainly have time if people want to stay on for another few minutes to ask questions, because I realized it was my fault to join a few minutes late.
There's a question typed there, so maybe you can read out here.
Yeah, there's a question that one of our guests have typed out. So here's the question. Aruna, you may have talked about it already. I have a bit of a networking issue here, but can you share a bit more on your average investment period of each project? How long does it take for you to make the first go or no-go decision? Normally, how much people are involved at the initial stage?
Okay, so I think that's saying we have a sort of escalating dating process. In the first, whether are we going to do anything or not, it's basically just a technology management team. So people like Zoe and Howard, they decide yes or no. Then we discuss as a team. So it's still a small team of about the 8 technologies. Make sure that we are taking the best deal in a space to internal stakeholders, not just different deal region. So I would strong. I think the next then still fairly because we're looking at the people in the business groups who will actually be the people working on it and not just the people making the decision. So if you have a focal point, you're still talking I would say, and I guess maybe I need Zoe to chip in here, but take 5 to 6 people. So it'll be the investment person and the technical person from my team, the commercial person and the technical person from the internal stakeholder. And that's pretty much it. So it's still a small group of 5 to 6 people. It's only when you've made the decision to invest and getting into term sheet discussions, it's after the term sheet that we actually engage a wider group of people. All the functions that are listed, and usually it's one focal point per function, and usually we even have a focal point per region. Say, okay, let's look at tax issues in China, or tax issues in America, tax issue in Europe. So then we're talking probably around 15 people engaged in a due diligence process. Then when it comes to the investment committee, we have 5 or 6 people. So you just need to make sure that the 4 or 5 people that you had engaged in the beginning, that they are escalating their opinions also to their leaders. So there is no surprise there. But ventures clearly it's probably important, but it's still an ancillary service to the business. So I would say at any given stage, we are talking a maximum of 15 people from across function, 15 to 20 maybe max across the different functions would be involved.
Okay, thank you for that. That's a very comprehensive answer. So that's the second question from the audience. Do we have any more questions from the audience for Aruna here?
All right. If there are none, then I would just say thank you for your time. I think it's lovely to see so many people engaged or interested in CVC. So at least we know that we are leaving the future of CVC in good hands. I do have WeChat and I try to check it. So maybe not as often. If I am not answering your questions, then please either reach out to Zoe from my team. She's here at zoe.deng@sabic.com, or Min or Xavier, so they can compile questions and send it to me if needed. And of course, we can always do other sessions. Now I know how to get into this system. I think we can do other sessions on more specific things or more technical topics if needed.
That's fantastic.
Yeah, Aruna, thank you so much. I really appreciate you taking the time out to make this event. And I must say, I have found a lot of things in common, like the authenticity. I also believe that's like the most important thing, and the fact about the feminine behavior and the masculine behavior, and how you utilize, in fact, like this being a female to your advantage, right? Those are, I find a lot of the things that we think alike. So that's probably that's why we are in partnering together. So I will jot down some notes and to share in the group, so that other people who couldn't join, they have a summary of some of the points that you talked about, which I think is very important. And we have a recording that we can share with, like there are a couple of the CVCs already said they couldn't join, but they would like to watch the recording. So we will send that to you as well, in case you have others that you want to share this with. I think your perspectives are really excellent and really would be very interesting for many CVC.
Yeah, thanks, Min. And I think let's continue the dialogue. It's a small community and it's nice to stay connected.
Yeah, great. Thank you.
All right.
Fantastic.
Thank you.
Thank you, everybody.
Thank you, Aruna.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.
Bye.